Demonology and Devil-lore by Moncure Daniel Conway, 1879. Narrated by Whitlock. Preface. 3 friars, says a legend, hid themselves near the witch Sabbath orgies that they might count the devils. But the chief of these, discovering the friars, said, "Reverend brothers, our army is such that if all the Alps, their rocks and glaciers were equally divided among us, none would have a pound's weight." This was in one alpine valley. Anyone who has caught but a glimpse of the world's Walpurgis night as revealed in mythology and folklore must agree that this courteous devil did not overstate the case. Any attempt to catalogue the evil spectres which have haunted mankind were like trying to count the shadows cast upon the earth by the rising sun. This conviction has grown upon the author of this work at every step in his studies of the subject. In 1859 I contributed, as one of the American tracts for the Times, a pamphlet entitled The Natural History of the Devil. Probably the chief value of that essay was to myself, and this in that its preparation had revealed to me how pregnant with interest and importance was the subject selected. Subsequent researches in the same direction, after I had come to reside in Europe, revealed how slight had been my conception of the vastness of the domain upon which that early venture was made. In 1872, while preparing a series of lectures for the Royal Institution on Demonology, it appeared to me that the best I could do was to print those lectures with some notes and additions. But after they were delivered, there still remained with me unused the greater part of materials collected in many countries, and the phantasmal creatures which I had evoked would not permit me to rest from my labors until I had dealt with them more thoroughly. The fable of Thor's attempt to drink up a small spring, and his failure because it was fed by the ocean, seems aimed at such efforts as mine. But there is another aspect of the case which has yielded me more encouragement. These phantom hosts, however unmanageable as to number, when closely examined, present comparatively few types. They coalesce by hundreds. From being at first overwhelmed by their multiplicity, the classifier finds himself at length beating bushes to start a new variety. Around some single form, the physiognomy, it may be, of hunger or disease, of lust or cruelty, ignorant imagination has broken up nature into innumerable bits which, like mirrors of various surface, reflect the same in endless sizes and distortions, but they vanish if that central fact be withdrawn. In trying to conquer, as it were, these imaginary monsters, they have sometimes swarmed and gibbered around me in a mad comedy which travestied their tragic sway over those who believed in their reality. Gargoyles extended their grin over the finest architecture, cornices coiled to serpents. The very words of speakers started out of their conventional sense into images that tripped my attention. Only as what I believed right solutions were given to their problems were my sphinxes laid. But through this psychological experience, it, 7, appeared that when one was so laid, his or her legion disappeared also. Long ago such phantasms ceased to haunt my nerves because I discovered their unreality. I am now venturing to believe that their mythologic forms cease to haunt my studies because I have found out their reality. Why slay the slain? Such may be the question that will arise in the minds of many who see this book. A Scotch song says, "The devil is dead and buried at Kirkcaldy. If so, He did not die until he had created a world in his image. The natural world is overlaid by an unnatural religion, breeding bitterness around simplest thoughts, obstructions to science, estrangements not more reasonable than if they resulted from varying notions of lunar figures, all derived from the devil-bequeathed dogma that certain beliefs and disbeliefs are of infernal instigation. Dogmas molded in a fossil demonology make the foundation of institutions which divert wealth, learning, enterprise to fictitious ends. It has not, therefore, been mere intellectual curiosity which has kept me working at this subject these many years, but an increasing conviction that the sequelae of such superstitions are exercising a still formidable influence. When Father Delaporte lately published his book on the devil, his bishop wrote, "Reverend Father, if everyone busied himself with the devil as you do, the kingdom of God would gain by it." Identifying the kingdom here spoken of as that of truth, it has been with a certain concurrence in the bishop's sentiment that I have busied myself with the work now given to the public. Part 1. Demonolatry. Chapter 1. Dualism. Origin of deism. Evolution from the far to the near. Illustrations from witchcraft. The primitive pantheism. The dawn of dualism. A college in the state of Ohio has adopted for its motto the words, "Orient thyself." This significant admonition to Western youth represents one condition of attaining truth in the science of mythology. Through neglect of it, the glowing personifications and metaphors of the East have too generally migrated to the West only to find it a Medusa, turning them to stone. Our prosaic literalism changes their ideals to idols. The time has come when we must learn rather to see ourselves in them. Out of an age and civilization where we live in habitual recognition of natural forces, we may transport ourselves to a period and region where no sophisticated eye looks upon nature. The sun is a chariot drawn by shining steeds and driven by a refulgent deity. The stars ascend and move by arbitrary power or command. The tree is the bower of a spirit. The fountain leaps from the urn of a naiad. In such gay costumes did the laws of nature hold their carnival until science struck the hour for unmasking. The costumes and masks have, with us, become materials for studying the history of the human mind, but to know them we must translate our senses back into that phase of our own early existence, so far as is consistent with carrying our culture with us. Without conceding too much to solar mythology, it may be pronounced tolerably clear that the earliest emotion of worship was born out of the wonder with which man looked up to the heavens above him, the splendors of the morning and evening, the azure vault painted with frescoes of cloud or blackened by the storm, the night crowned with constellations. These awakened imagination, inspired awe, kindled admiration, and at length adoration in the being who had reached intervals in which his eye was lifted above the earth. Amid the rapture of Vedic hymns to these sublimities, we meet sharp questionings whether there be any such gods as the priests say, and suspicion is sometimes cast on sacrifices. The forms that peopled the celestial spaces may have been those of ancestors, kings, and great men, but anterior to all forms was the poetic enthusiasm which built heavenly mansions for them, and the crude cosmogonies of primitive science were probably caught up by this spirit and consecrated as slowly as scientific generalizations now are. Our modern ideas of evolution might suggest the reverse of this. that human worship began with things low and gradually ascended to high objects, that from rude ages in which adoration was directed to stock and stone, tree and reptile, the human mind climbed by degrees to the contemplation and reverence of celestial grandeurs. But the accord of this view with our ideas of evolution is apparent only. The real progress seems here to have been from the far to the near, from the great to the small. It is, indeed, probably inexact to speak of the worship of stock and stone, weed and wart, insect and reptile, as primitive. There are many indications that such things were by no race considered intrinsically sacred, nor were they really worshipped until the origin of their sanctity was lost. And even now, ages after their oracular or symbolical character has been forgotten, the superstitions that have survived in connection with such insignificant objects point to an original association with the phenomena of the heavens. No religions could, at first glance, seem wider apart than the worship of the serpent and that of the glorious sun. Yet many ancient temples are covered with symbols combining sun and snake, and no form is more familiar in Egypt than the solar serpent standing erect upon its tail, with rays around its head. Nor is this high relationship of the adored reptile found only in regions where it might have been raised up by ethnical combinations as the mere survival of a savage symbol. William Craft, an African who resided for some time in the kingdom of Dahomey, informed me of the following incident which he had witnessed there. The sacred serpents are kept in a grand house, which they sometimes leave to crawl in their neighboring grounds. One day a Negro from some distant region encountered one of these animals and killed it. The people, learning that one of their gods had been slain, seized the stranger, and having surrounded him with a circle of brushwood, set it on fire. The poor wretch broke through the circle of fire and ran, pursued by the crowd, who struck him with heavy sticks. Smarting from the flames and blows, he rushed into a river. But no sooner had he entered there than the pursuit ceased, and he was told that, having gone through fire and water, he was purified and might emerge with safety. Thus, even in that distant and savage region, serpent worship was associated with fire worship and river worship, which have a wide representation in both Aryan and Semitic symbolism. To this day, the Orthodox Israelites set beside their dead, before burial, the lighted candle and a basin of pure water. These have been associated in rabbinical mythology with the angels Michael, genius of water, and Gabriel, genius of fire. But they refer both to the phenomenal glories and the purifying effects of the two elements, as reverenced by the Africans in one direction, and the Parsees in another. Not less significant are the facts which were attested at the witch trials. It was shown that, for their pretended divinations, they used plants, as rue and vervain, well known in the ancient northern religions and often recognized as examples of tree worship. But it also appeared that around the cauldron a mock zodiacal circle was drawn, and that every herb employed was alleged to have derived its potency from having been gathered at a certain hour of the night or day, a particular quarter of the moon, or from some spot where sun or moon did or did not shine upon it. Ancient planet worship is, indeed, still reflected in the habit of village herbalists, who gather their simples at certain phases of the moon, or at certain of those holy periods of the year, which conform more or less to the pre-Christian festivals. These are a few out of many indications that the small and senseless things, which have become almost or quite fetishes, were by no means such at first, but were mystically connected with the heavenly elements and splendors like the animal forms in the zodiac. In one of the earliest hymns of the Rig Veda, it is said, "This earth belongs to Varuna the king, and the wide sky. He is contained also in this drop of water." As the sky was seen reflected in the shining curve of a dewdrop, even so in the shape or color of a leaf or flower, the transformation of a chrysalis, or the burial and resurrection of a scarabaeus's egg. Some sign could be detected making it answer in place of the typical image which could not yet be painted or carved. The necessities of expression would of course operate to invest the primitive conceptions and interpretations of celestial phenomena with those pictorial images drawn from earthly objects, of which the early languages are chiefly composed. In many cases that are met in the most ancient hymns, the designations of exalted objects are so little descriptive of them that we may refer them to a period anterior to the formation of that refined and complex symbolism by which primitive religions have acquired a representation in definite characters. The Vedic comparisons of the various colors of the dawn to horses, or the rain clouds to cows, denotes the much less mature development of thought than the fine observation implied in the connection of the forked lightning with the forked serpent tongue and forked mistletoe, or symbolization of the universe in the concentric folds of an onion. It is the presence of these more mystical and complex ideas in religions which indicate a progress of the human mind from the large and obvious to the more delicate and occult, and the growth of the higher vision, which can see small things in their large relationships. Although the exaltation in the Vedas of Varuna as king of heaven, and as contained also in a drop of water, is in one verse, we may well recognize an immense distance in time between the two ideas there embodied. The first represents that primitive pantheism, which is the counterpart of ignorance. An unclassified outward universe is the reflection of a mind without form and void. It is while all within is as yet undiscriminating wonder that the religious vesture of nature will be this undefined pantheism. The fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil has not yet been tasted. In some of the earlier hymns of the Rig Veda, the Maruts, the storm deities, are praised along with Indra, the sun. Yama, king of death, is equally adored with the goddess of dawn. No real foe of yours is known in heaven, nor in earth. The storms are thy allies. Such is the high optimism of sentences found even in sacred books, which elsewhere mask the dawn of the dualism which ultimately superseded the harmony of the elemental powers. I create light, and I create darkness. I create good, and I create evil. Look unto Yezdan, who causeth the shadow to fall. But it is easy to see what must be the result when this happy family of sun god and storm god and fire god, and their innumerable coordinate divinities, shall be divided by discord. When each shall have become associated with some earthly object or fact, he or she will appear as friend or foe, and their connection with the sources of human pleasure and pain will be reflected in collisions and wars in the heavens. The rebel clouds will be transformed to titans and dragons. The adored Maruts will be no longer storm heroes with unsheathed swords of lightning, marching as the retinue of Indra, but fire-breathing monsters, Vritras and Ahis, and the morning and evening shadows from faithful watchdogs become the treacherous hellhounds. like Orthros and Cerberus. The vehement antagonisms between animals and men and of tribe against tribe will be expressed in the conception of struggles among gods, who will thus be classified as good or evil deities. This was precisely what did occur. The primitive pantheism was broken up. In its place, the later ages beheld the universe as the arena of a tremendous conflict between good and evil powers, who severally, in the process of time, marshaled each and everything, from a world to a worm, under their flaming banners. Chapter 2. The Genesis of Demons. Their good names euphemistic, their mixed character, illustrations, Beelzebub, Loki, demon germs, the knowledge of good and evil, distinction between demon and devil. The first pantheon of each race was built of intellectual speculations. In a moral sense, each form in it might be described as more or less demonic, and indeed it may almost be affirmed that religion, considered as a service rendered to superhuman beings, began with the propitiation of demons, albeit they might be called gods. Man found that in the earth good things came with difficulty, while thorns and weeds sprang up everywhere. The evil powers seemed to be the strongest. The best deity had a touch of the demon in him. The sun is the most beneficent, yet he bears the sunstroke along with the sunbeam and withers the blooms he calls forth. The splendor, the might, the majesty, the menace, the grandeur and wrath of the heavens and the elements were blended in these personifications, and reflected in the trembling adoration paid to them. The flattering names given to these powers by their worshippers must be interpreted by the costly sacrifices with which men sought to propitiate them. No sacrifice would have been offered originally to a purely benevolent power. The Furies were called the Eumenides, the well-meaning, and there arises a temptation to regard the name as preserving the primitive meaning of the Sanskrit original of Erinyes, namely Saranyu, which signifies the morning light stealing over the sky. But the descriptions of the Erinyes by the Greek poets, especially of Aeschylus, who pictures them as black, serpent-locked with eyes dropping blood and calls them hounds, show that Saranyu as morning light and thus the revealer of deeds of darkness had gradually been degraded into a personification of the curse. And yet, while recognizing the name Eumenides as euphemistic, we may admire none the less the growth of that rationalism which ultimately found in the epithet a suggestion of the soul of good in things evil, and almost restored the beneficent sense of Saranyu. I have settled in this place, says Athene in the Eumenides of Aeschylus. These mighty deities hard to be appeased, they have obtained by lot to administer all things concerning men. But he who has not found them gentle knows not whence come the ills of life. But before the dread Erinyes of Homer's age had become the venerable goddesses of popular phrase in Athens, or the Eumenides of the later poets' high insight, piercing their Gorgon form as portrayed by himself, they had passed through all the phases of human terror. Cowering generations had tried to soothe the remorseless avengers by complimentary phrases. The worship of the serpent, originating in the same fear, similarly raised that animal into the region where poets could invest it with many profound and beautiful significances. But these more distinctly terrible deities are found in the shadowy borderland of mythology, from which we may look back into ages when the fear in which worship is born had not yet been separated into its elements of awe and admiration, nor the heaven of supreme forces divided into ranks of benevolent and malevolent beings. And on the other hand, we may look forward to the ages in which the moral consciousness of man begins to form the distinctions between good and evil, right and wrong, which changes cosmogony into religion and impresses every deity of the mind's creation to do his or her part in reflecting the physical and moral struggles of mankind. The intermediate processes by which the good and evil were detached and advanced to separate personification cannot always be traced, but the indications of their work are in most cases sufficiently clear. The relationship, for instance, between Baal and Baal-zebub cannot be doubted. The one represents the sun in his glory as quickener of nature and painter of its beauty, the other, the insect-breeding power of the sun. Baal-zebub is the fly god. Only at a comparatively recent period did the deity of the Philistines, whose oracle was consulted by Ahaziah, suffer under the reputation of being the prince of devils, his name being changed by a mere pun to Beelzebul, dung god. It is not impossible that the modern Egyptian mother's hesitation to disturb flies settling on her sleeping child, and the sanctity attributed to various insects, originated in the awe felt for him. The title fly god is paralleled by the reverent epithet apomios, applied to Zeus as worshipped at Elys, the Meagrus deus of the Romans, and the Myodes mentioned by Pliny. Our picture is probably from a protecting charm and evidently by the god's believers. There is a story of a peasant woman in a French church who was found kneeling before a marble group and was warned by a priest that she was worshipping the wrong figure, namely Beelzebub. "Never mind," she replied. "It is well enough to have friends on both sides." The story, though now only ben trovato, would represent the actual state of mind in many a Babylonian, invoking the protection of the fly god against formidable swarms of his venomous subjects. Not less clear is the illustration supplied by Scandinavian mythology. In Sæmund's Edda, the evil-minded Loki says, "Odin, dost thou remember when we in early days blended our blood together? The two became detached very slowly, for their separation implied the crumbling away of a great religion and its distribution into new forms, and a religion requires relatively as long to decay as it does to grow, as we who live under a crumbling religion have good reason to know." Protap Chunder Mozumdar of the Brahmo Somaj, in an address in London, said, "The Indian pantheon has many millions of deities, and no space is left for the devil." He might have added that these deities have distributed between them all the work that the devil could perform if he were admitted. His remark recalled to me the Eddaic story of Loki's entrance into the assembly of gods in the halls of Oegyr. Loki, destined in a later age to be identified with Satan, is angrily received by the deities, but he goes round and mentions incidents in the life of each one which show them to be little if any better than himself. The gods and goddesses, unable to reply, confirm the cynic's criticisms in theologic fashion by tying him up with a serpent for cord. The late Theodore Parker is said to have replied to a Calvinist who sought to convert him, "The difference between us is simple. Your God is my devil." There can be little question that the Hebrews, from whom the Calvinist inherited his deity, had no devil in their mythology, because the jealous and vindictive Jehovah was quite equal to any work of that kind, as the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, bringing plagues upon the land or deceiving a prophet and then destroying him for his false prophecies. The same accommodating relation of the primitive deities to all natural phenomena will account for the absence of distinct representatives of evil of the most primitive religions. The earliest exceptions to this primeval harmony of the gods, implying moral chaos in man, were trifling enough. The occasional monster seems worthy of mention only to display the valor of the god who slew him. But such were demon germs born out of the structural action of the human mind, so soon as it began to form some philosophy concerning a universe upon which it had at first looked with simple wonder, and destined to an evolution of vast import when the work of moralizing upon them should follow. Let us take our stand beside our barbarian, but no longer savage ancestor in the far past. We have watched the rosy morning as it waxed to a blazing noon. Then swiftly the sun is blotted out. The tempest rages. It is a sudden night lit only by the forked lightning that strikes. Tree-house man with angry thunder. Peal. From an instructed age, man can look upon the storm blackening the sky, not as an enemy of the sun, but one of its own superlative effects. But some thousands of years ago, when we were all living in Eastern barbarism, we could not conceive that a luminary whose very business it was to give light could be a party to his own obscuration. We then looked with pity upon the ignorance of our ancestors, who had sung hymns to the storm dragons, hoping to flatter them into quietness. And we came by irresistible logic to that dualism which long divided the visible and still divides the moral universe into two hostile camps. His is the mother, principle out of which demons, in the ordinary sense of the term, proceeded. At first few, as distinguished from the host of deities by exceptional harmfulness, they were multiplied with man's growth in the classification of his world. Their principle of existence is capable of indefinite expansion, until it shall include all the realms of darkness, fear, and pain. In the names of demons, and in the fables concerning them, the struggles of man in his ages of weakness with peril, want, and death are recorded more fully than in any inscriptions on stone. Dualism is a creed which all superficial appearances attest. Side by side, the desert and the fruitful land, the sunshine and the frost, sorrow and joy, life and death, sit weaving around every life its vesture of bright and somber threads, and science alone can detect how each of these casts the shuttle to the other. Enemies to each other, they will appear in every realm which knowledge has not mastered. There's a refrain gathered from many ages in William Blake's apostrophe to the tiger. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye framed thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burned that fire within thine eyes? On what wings dared he aspire? What the hand dared seize the fire? When the stars threw down their spears, and water heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the Lamb make thee? That which one of the devoutest men of genius whom England has produced thus asked was silently answered in India by the serpent worshipper, kneeling with his tongue held in his hand. In Egypt, by Osiris seated on a throne of checker. It is necessary to distinguish clearly between the demon and the devil, though for some purposes they must be mentioned together. The world was haunted with demons for many ages. before there was any embodiment of their spirit in any central form, much less any conception of a principle of evil in the universe. The early demons had no moral character, not any more than the man-eating tiger. There is no outburst of moral indignation mingling with the shout of victory when Indra slays Vritra, and Apollo's face is serene when his dart pierces the python. It required a much higher development of the moral sentiment to give rise to the conception of a devil. Only that intensest light could cast so black a shadow athwart the world as the belief in a purely malignant spirit. To such a conception, love of evil for its own sake. The word devil is limited in this work. Demon is applied to beings whose harmfulness is not gratuitous, but incidental to their own satisfactions. Deity and demon are from words once interchangeable, and the latter has simply suffered degradation by the conventional use of it to designate the less beneficent powers and qualities which originally inhered in every deity, after they were detached from these and separately personified. Every bright god had his shadow, so to say, and under the influence of dualism this shadow attained a distinct existence and personality in the popular imagination. The principle having once been established, that what seemed beneficent and what seemed the reverse must be ascribed to different powers, it is obvious that the evolution of demons must be continuous, and their distribution coextensive with the ills that flesh is heir to. Chapter 3. Degradation. The degradation of deities, indicated in names, legends of their fall, incidental signs of the divine origin of demons and devils. The atmospheric conditions having been prepared in the human mind for the production of demons, the particular shapes or names they would assume would be determined by a variety of circumstances, ethnical, climatic, political, or even accidental. They would indeed be rarely accidental, but Professor Max Miller, in his notes to the Rig Veda, has called attention to a remarkable instance in which the formation of an imposing mythological figure of this kind had its name determined by what, in all probability, was an accident. There appears in the earliest Vedic hymns the name of Aditi as the holy mother of many gods, and thrice there is mentioned the female name Diti, but there is reason to believe that Diti is a mere reflex of Aditi, the A being dropped originally by a reciter's license. The later reciters, however, regarding every letter in so sacred a book, or even the omission of a letter, as of eternal significance. Diti, this decapitated Aditi, was evolved into a separate and powerful being, and, every niche of beneficence being occupied by its god or goddess, the new form was at once relegated to the newly defined realm of evil, where she remained as the mother of the enemies of the gods, the deities. Unhappily, this accident followed the ancient tendency by which the furies and vices have, with scandalous constancy, been described in the feminine gender. The close resemblance between these two names of Hindu mythology, severally representing the best and the worst, may be thus accidental, and only serve to show how the demon-forming tendency, after it began, was able to press even the most trivial incidents into its service. But generally, the names of demons and for whole races of demons report far more than this, and in no inquiry more than that before us is it necessary to remember that names are things. The philological facts supply a remarkable confirmation of the statements already made as to the original identity of demon and deity. The word demon itself, as we have said, originally bore a good instead of an evil meaning. The Sanskrit deva, the shining one, Sendaiva, correspond with the Greek theos, Latin deus, Anglo-Saxon tu, and remain in deity, deus. Probably, it exists in Armorican tus, a phantom, devil, the gypsy name for God, and Persian diikfiuf, demon. The demon of Socrates represents the personification of a being still good, but no doubt on the path of decline from pure divinity. Plato declares that good men, when they die, become demons, and he says, demons are reporters and carriers between gods and men. Our familiar word bogey, a sort of nickname for an evil spirit, comes from the Slavonic word for god, bog. Appearing here in the West as bogey, Welsh BWG, a goblin, this word bog began probably as the baga of cuneiform inscriptions, a name of the supreme being, or possibly the Hindu Bhaga, Lord of Life. In the Bishop's Bible, the passage occurs in, "Thou shalt not be afraid of any bugs by night." The word has been altered to terror. When we come to the particular names of demons, we find many of them bearing traces of the splendors from which they have declined. Siva, the Hindu god of destruction, has a meaning, auspicious, derived from svaha, thrive, thus related ideally to Pluto, wealth, and indeed, in later ages, appears to have gained the greatest elevation. In a story of the Persian poem Masnavi, Ahriman is mentioned with Bahman as a fire fiend, of which class are the Magian demons, and the jinns generally, which, the sanctity of fire being considered, is an evidence of their high origin. Avicenna says that the genii are ethereal animals. Lucifer, light-bearing, is the fallen angel of the morning star. Loki, the nearest to an evil power of the Scandinavian personifications, is the German Leucht, or light. Azazel, a word inaccurately rendered scapegoat in the Bible, appears to have been originally a deity, as the Israelites were originally required to offer up one goat to Jehovah and another to Azazel, a name which appears to signify the strength of God. Gesenius and Ewald regard Azazel as a demon belonging to the pre-Mosaic religion, but it can hardly be doubted that the 4 archdemons mentioned by the rabbins, Samael, Azazel, Esael, and Macathiel, are personifications of the elements as energies of the deity. Samael would appear to mean the left hand of God, Azazel his strength, Asael his reproductive force, and Macathiel his retributive power, but the origin of these names is doubtful. Although Azazel is now one of the Mussulman names for a devil, it would appear to be nearly related to Al-Uzza of the Quran, one of the goddesses of whom the significant tradition exists, that once when Muhammad had read from the surah called the Star, the question, "What think ye of Alat, Al-Uzza, and Mana, that other 3rd goddess?" He himself added, "These are the most high and beauteous damsels, whose intercession is to be hoped for," the response being afterwards attributed to a suggestion of Satan. Belial is merely a word for godlessness. It has become personified through the misunderstanding of the phrase in the Old Testament by the translators of the Septuagint, and thus passed into Christian use, as in 2 Corinthians 6:15, "What concord hath Christ with Belial?" The word is not used as a proper name in the Old Testament, and the late creation of a demon out of it may be set down to accident. Even where the names of demons and devils bear no such traces of their degradation from the state of deities, there are apt to be characteristics attributed to them, or myths connected with them, which point in the direction indicated. Such is the case with Satan, of whom much must be said hereafter, whose Hebrew name signifies the adversary, but who, in the book of Job, appears among the sons of God. The name given to the devil in the Quran, Eblis, is almost certainly diabolos-arabicized, and while this Greek word is found in Pindar, meaning a slanderer, the fables in the Quran concerning Iblis describe him as a fallen angel of the highest rank. One of the most striking indications of the fall of demons from heaven is the widespread belief that they are lame. Mr. Tyler has pointed out the curious persistence of this idea in various ethnical lines of development. Hephaestus was lamed by his fall when hurled by Zeus from Olympus, and it is not a little singular that in the English travesty of Limping Vulcan, represented in Wayland the Smith, there should appear the suggestion remarked by Mr. Cox of the name Vala, one of the designations of the dragon destroyed by Indra. In Sir Walter Scott's romance, says Mr. Cox, Wayland is a mere impostor who avails himself of a popular superstition to keep up an air of mystery about himself and his work, but the character to which he makes pretense belongs to the genuine Teutonic legend. The Persian demon Eshma, the Asmodeus of the Book of Tobit, appears with the same characteristic of lameness in the Diable boiteux of Le Sage. The Christian devil's clubbed or cloven foot is notorious. Even the horns popularly attributed to the devil may possibly have originated with the aureole which indicates the glory of his first estate. Satan is depicted in various relics of early art wearing the aureole, as in a miniature of the 10th century, given by Monsieur Diderot. The same author has shown that Pan and the satyrs, who had so much to do with the shaping of our horned and hoofed devil, originally got their horns from the same high source as Moses in the old Bibles, and in the great statue of him at Rome by Michelangelo. It is through this mythologic history that the most powerful demons have been associated in the popular imagination with the stars, planets, Ketu in India, Saturn and Mercury the infortunes, comets, and other celestial phenomena. The examples of this are so numerous that it is impossible to deal with them here, where I can only hope to offer a few illustrations of the principles affirmed, and in this case it is of less importance for the English reader because of the interesting volume in which the subject has been specially dealt with. Incidentally, too, the astrological demons and devils must recur from time to time in the process of our inquiry, but it will probably be within the knowledge of some of my readers that the dread of comets and of meteoric showers yet lingers in many parts of Christendom, and that fear of unlucky stars has not passed away with astrologers. There is a Scottish legend told by Hugh Miller of an avenging meteoric demon. A shipmaster who had moored his vessel near Morial's den amused himself by watching the lights of the scattered farmhouses. After all the rest had gone out, one light lingered for some time. When that light too had disappeared, the shipmaster beheld a large meteor which, with a hissing noise, moved towards the cottage. A dog howled, an owl whooped. But when the fireball had almost reached the roof, a cock crew from within the cottage, and the meteor rose again. Thrice this was repeated, the meteor at the third cock-crow ascending among the stars. On the following day the shipmaster went on shore, purchased the cock, and took it away with him. Returned from his voyage, he looked for the cottage, and found nothing but a few blackened stones. Nearly 60 years ago a human skeleton was found near the spot, doubled up as if the body had been huddled into a hole. This revived the legend, and probably added some of those traits which make it a true bit of mosaic in the mythology of Astrea. The fabled fall of Lucifer really signifies a process similar to that which has been noticed in the case of Saranyu. The morning star, like the morning light as revealer of the deeds of darkness, becomes an avenger, and by evolution, an instigator of the evil it originally disclosed and punished. It may be remarked also that though we have inherited the phrase demons of darkness, it was an ancient rabbinical belief that the demons went abroad in darkness, not only because it facilitated their attacks on man, but because being of luminous forms, they could recognize each other better with a background of darkness. Chapter 4. The Abgot. The ex-god, deities demonized by conquest, theological animosity, illustration from the Avesta, devil worship and arrested deism, Sheikh Adi, why demons were painted ugly, survivals of their beauty. The phenomena of the transformation of deities into demons meet the student of demonology at every step. We shall have to consider many examples of a kind similar to those which have been mentioned in the preceding chapter, but it is necessary to present at this stage of our inquiry a sufficient number of examples to establish the fact that, in every country, forces have been at work to degrade the primitive gods into types of yaml, as preliminary to a consideration of the nature of those forces. We find the history of the phenomena suggested in the German word for idol, Abgott, ex-god. Then we have pagan, villager, and heathen of the heath, denoting those who stood by their old gods after others had transferred their faith to the new. These words bring us to consider the influence upon religious conceptions of the struggles which have occurred between races and nations, and consequently between their religions. It must be borne in mind that by the time any tribes had gathered to the consistency of a nation, one of the strongest forces of its coherence would be its priesthood. So soon as it became a general belief that there were in the universe good and evil powers, there must arise a popular demand for the means of obtaining their favor, and this demand has never failed to obtain a supply of priesthoods, claiming to bind or influence the preternatural beings. These priesthoods represent the strongest motives and fears of a people, and they were gradually entrenched in great institutions involving powerful interests. Every invasion or collision or mingling of races thus brought their respective religions into contact and rivalry, and as no priesthood has been known to consent peaceably to its own downfall and the degradation of its own deities, we need not wonder that there have been perpetual wars for religious ascendancy. It is not unusual to hear sects among ourselves accusing each other of idolatry. In earlier times, the rule was for each religion to denounce its opponents, gods as devils. Gregory the Great wrote to his missionary in Britain, the Abbot Mellitus, second Bishop of Canterbury, that, whereas the people were accustomed to sacrifice many oxen in honor of demons, let them celebrate a religious and solemn festival, and not slay the animals to the devil, Diabolo, but to be eaten by themselves to the glory of God. Thus, the devotion of meats to those deities of our ancestors which the Pope pronounces demons, which took place chiefly at Yuletide, has survived in our more comfortable Christmas banquets. This was the fate of all the deities which Christianity undertook to suppress, but it had been the habit of religions for many ages before. They never denied the actual existence of the deities they were engaged in suppressing. That would have been too great an outrage upon popular beliefs, and might have caused a reaction. And besides, each new religion had an interest of its own in preserving the basis of belief in these invisible beings. Disbelief in the very existence of the old gods might be followed by a skeptical spirit that might endanger the new. So the propagandists maintained the existence of native gods, but called them devils. Sometimes wars or intercourse between tribes led to their fusion. The battle between opposing religions was drawn, in which case there would be a compromise by which several deities of different origin might continue together in the same race and receive equal homage. The differing degrees of importance ascribed to the separate persons of the Hindu triad in various localities of India suggest it as quite probable that Brahma, Vishnu, and Siva signaled in their union the political unity of certain districts in that country. The blending of the names of Confucius and Buddha in many Chinese and Japanese temples may show us an analogous process now going on, and indeed, the various ethnical ideas combined in the Christian Trinity render the fact stated one of easy interpretation, but the religious difficulty was sometimes not susceptible of compromise. The most powerful priesthood carried the day, and they used every ingenuity to degrade the gods of their opponents. Agatha demons were turned into cacodemons. The serpent, worshipped in many lands, might be adopted as the support of sleeping Vishnu in India, might be associated with the rainbow, the heavenly serpent, in Persia, but elsewhere was cursed as the very genius of evil. The operation of this force in the degradation of deities is particularly revealed in the sacred books of Persia. In that country, the great religions of the East would appear to have contended against each other with a special fury, and their struggles were probably instrumental in causing one or more of the early migrations into Western Europe. The great celestial war between Ormuzd and Ahriman, light and darkness, corresponded with a violent theological conflict, one result of which is that the word diva, meaning deity to Brahmins, means devil to Parsis. The following extract from the Zendavesta will serve as an example of the spirit in which the war was waged. All your divas are only manifold children of the evil mind, and the great one who worships the Sahoma of lies and deceits, besides the treacherous acts for which you are notorious throughout the 7 regions of the earth. You have invented all the evil which men speak and do, which is indeed pleasant to the devas, but is devoid of all goodness, and therefore perishes before the insight of the truth of the wise. Thus you defraud men of their good minds and of their immortality by your evil minds, as well through those of the devas as that of the evil spirit, through evil deeds and evil words, whereby the power of liars grows. That is to say, ours is the true God. Your God is a devil. The Zoroastrian conversion of Deva, Deus, into devil does not alone represent the work of this odium theologicum. In the early hymns of India, the appellation Asuras is given to the gods. Asura means a spirit, but in the process of time Asura, like demon, came to have a sinister meaning. The gods were called Suras, the demons Asuras, and these were said to contend together. But in Persia, the Asuras, demonized in India, retained their divinity and gave the name Ahura to the supreme deity, Ormuzd, Ahura Mazda. On the other hand, as Mr. Muir supposes, Varenya, applied to evil spirits of darkness in the Zendavesta, is cognate with Varuna, heaven, and the Vedic Indra, king of the gods, the sun, is named in the Zoroastrian religion as one of the chief counselors of that prince of darkness. But in every country conquered by a new religion, there will always be found some, as we have seen, who will hold on to the old deity under all his changed fortunes. These will be called bigots, but still they will adhere to the ancient belief and practice the old rites. Sometimes even after they have had to yield to the popular terminology and call the old god a devil, they will find some reason for continuing the transmitted forms. It is probable that to this cause was originally due the religions which have been developed into what is now termed devil worship, the distinct and avowed worship of the evil power in preference to the good is a rather startling phenomenon when presented boldly, as, for example, in a prayer of the Madagascans to Nyang, author of evil, quoted by Dr. Reveal, O Zamhor, to thee we offer no prayers. The good God needs no asking, but we must pray to Nyang. Nyang must be appeased, O Nyang, bad and strong spirit. Let not the thunder roar over our heads. Tell the sea to keep within its bounds. Spare, O Nyang, the ripening fruit, and dry not up the blossoming rice. Let not our women bring forth children on the accursed days. Thou reignest, and this thou knowest over the wicked, and great is their number, O Nyang. Torment not then any longer the good folk. This is natural and suggestive of the criminal under sentence of death, who, when asked if he was not afraid to meet his God, replied, Not in the least. It's that other party I'm afraid of. Yet it is hardly doubtful that the worship of Niang began in an era when he was by no means considered morally baser than Zamhor. How the theory of dualism, when attained, might produce the phenomenon called devil worship is illustrated in the case of the Yazidis, now so notorious for that species of religion. Their theory is usually supposed to be entirely represented by the expression uttered by one of them, Will not Satan, then, reward the poor Yazidis, who alone have never spoken ill of him, and have suffered so much for him? But these words are significant, no doubt, of the underlying fact. They have never spoken ill of the Satan they worship. The Mussulman calls the Yazidi a Satan worshipper, only as the early Zoroastrian held the worshipper of a diva to be the same. The chief object of worship among the Yazidis is the figure of the bird Taus, a half-mythical peacock. Professor King of Cambridge traces the Taus of this Assyrian sect to the sacred bird called a phoenix, whose picture, as seen by Herodotus in Egypt, is described by him as very like an eagle in outline and in size, but with plumage partly gold-colored, partly crimson, and which was said to return to Heliopolis every 500 years, there to burn itself on the altar of the sun, that another might rise from its ashes. Now the name Yazidis is simply Izids, genii, and we are thus pointed to Arabia, where we find the belief in genii is strongest, and also associated with the mythical bird Ruk of its folklore. There we find Muhammad rebuking the popular belief in a certain bird called Hama, which was said to take form from the blood near the brain of a dead person and fly away, to return, however, at the end of every 100 years, to visit that person's sepulchre. But this is by no means devil worship, nor can we find any trace of that in the most sacred scripture of the Yazidis, the eulogy of Sheikh Adi. This sheikh inherited from his father, Musafir, the sanctity of an incarnation of the divine essence, of which he, Adi, speaks as the All-Merciful. By his light he hath lighted the lamp of the morning. I am he that placed Adam in my paradise. I am he that made Nimrod a hot, burning fire. I am he that guided Amet, mine elect. I gifted him with my way and guidance. Mine are all existences together. They are my gift and under my direction. I am he that possesseth all majesty, and beneficence and charity are from my grace. I am he that entereth the heart in my zeal, and I shine through the power of my awfulness and majesty. I am he to whom the lion of the desert came. I rebuked him, and he became like stone. I am he to whom the serpent came, and by my will I made him like dust. I am he that shook the rock and made it tremble, and sweet water flowed therefrom from every side. The reverence shown in these sacred sentences for Hebrew names and traditions, as of Adam in paradise, Marah, and the smitten rock, and for Ahmet, Mohammed, appears to have had its only requital in the odious designation of the worshippers of Taus as devil worshippers, a label which the Yazidis perhaps accepted as the Wesleyans and Friends accepted such names as Methodist and Quaker. Muhammad has expiated the many deities he degraded to devils by being himself turned to an idol, Momet, a term of contempt all the more popular for its resemblance to mummery. Despite his denunciations of idolatry, it is certain that this earlier religion represented by the Yazidis has never been entirely suppressed even among his own followers. In Dr. Leitner's interesting collection there is a lamp which he obtained from a mosque, made in the shape of a peacock, and this is but one of many similar relics of primitive or alien symbolism found among the Mussulman tribes. The evolution of demons and devils out of deities was made real to the popular imagination in every country where the new religion found art existing, and by alliance with it was enabled to shape the ideas of the people. The theoretical degradation of deities of previously fair association could only be completed where they were presented to the eye in repulsive forms. It will readily occur to everyone that a rationally conceived demon or devil would not be repulsive. If it were a demon that man wished to represent, mere euphemism would prevent its being rendered odious. The main characteristic of a demon, that which distinguishes it from a devil, is, as we have seen, that it has a real and human-like motive for whatever evil it causes. If it afflict or consume a man, it is not from mere malignancy, but because impelled by the pangs of hunger, lust, or other suffering, like the famished wolf or shark. And if sacrifices of food were offered to satisfy its need, equally we might expect that no unnecessary insult would be offered in the attempt to portray it. But if it were a devil, a being actuated by simple malevolence, one of its essential functions, temptation, would be destroyed by hideousness. For the work of seduction we might expect a devil to wear the form of an angel of light, but by no means to approach his intended victim in any horrible shape, such as would repel every mortal. The great representations of evil, whether imagined by the speculative or the religious sense, have never been, originally, ugly. The gods might be described as falling swiftly like lightning out of heaven, but in the popular imagination they attained for a long time much of their splendor. The very ingenuity with which they were afterwards invested with ugliness in religious art attests that there were certain popular sentiments about them which had to be distinctly reversed. It was because they were thought beautiful that they must be painted ugly. It was because they were, even among converts to the new religion, still secretly believed to be kind and helpful, that there was employed such elaboration of hideous designs to deform them. The pictorial representations of demons and devils will come under a more detailed examination hereafter. It is for the present sufficient to point out that the traditional blackness or ugliness of demons and devils, as now thought of, by no means militates against the fact that they were once the popular deities. The contrast, for instance, between the horrible physiognomy given to Satan in ordinary Christian art and the theological representation of him as the tempter is obvious. Had the design of art been to represent the theological theory, Satan would have been portrayed in a fascinating form. But the design was not that. It was to arouse horror and antipathy for the native deities to which the ignorant clung tenaciously. It was to train children to think of the still secretly worshipped idols as frightful and bestial beings. It is important, therefore, that we should guard against confusing the speculative or moral attempts of mankind to personify pain and evil with the ugly and brutal demons and devils of artificial superstition, oftenest pictured on church walls. Sometimes they are set to support waterspouts, often the brackets that hold their foes, the saints. It is a very ancient device. Our figure, too, is from the handle of a chalice in possession of Sir James Hooker, meant probably to hold the holy water of Ganges. These are not genuine demons or devils, but carefully caricatured deities. Who that looks upon the grinning bestial forms carved about the roof of any old church, as those on Melrose Abbey and York Cathedral, which, there is reason to believe, represent the primitive deities driven from the interior by potency of holy water and chained to the uncongenial service of supporting the roof gutter, can see in these gargoyles, French gargouille, dragon, anything but carved imprecations. Was it to such ugly beings, guardians of their streams, hills, and forests, that our ancestors consecrated the holly and mistletoe, or with such that they associated their flowers, fruits, and homes? They were caricatures inspired by missionaries, made to repel and disgust, as the images of saints beside them were carved in beauty to attract. If the pagans had been the artists, the good looks would have been on the other side. And indeed there was an art of which those pagans were the unconscious possessors, through which the true characters of the imaginary beings they adored have been transmitted to us. In the fables of their folklore we find the fairies that represent the spirit of the gods and goddesses to which they are easily traceable. That goddess who in Christian times was pictured as a hag riding on a broomstick was Frigga, the Earth Mother, associated with the first sacred affections clustering around the hearth. Or Freya, whose very name was consecrated in Frau, woman and wife. The mantle of Bertha did not cover more tenderness when it fell to the shoulders of Mary. The German child's name for the pre-Christian Madonna was Mother Rose. Distaff in hand, she watched over the industrious at their household work. She hovered near the cottage, perhaps to find there some weeping Cinderella and give her beauty for ashes. Chapter 5. Classification. The obstructions of man. The 12 chief classes, modifications of particular forms for various functions. Theological demons. The statements made concerning the fair names of the chief demons and devils which have haunted the imagination of mankind heighten the contrast between their celestial origin and the functions attributed to them in their degraded forms. The theory of dualism, representing a necessary stage in the mental development of every race, called for a supply of demons, and the supply came from the innumerable, dethroned, outlawed, and fallen deities and angels, which had followed the subjugation of races and their religions. But though their celestial origin might linger around them in some slight legend or characteristic as well as in their names, the evil phenomenon to which each was attached as an explanation assigned the real form and work with which he or she was associated in popular superstition. We therefore find in the demons, in which men have believed a complete catalogue of the obstacles with which they have had to contend in the long struggle for existence. In the devils we discover equally the history of the moral and religious struggles through which priesthoods and churches have had to pass, and the relative extent of this or that particular class of demons or devils, and the intensity of belief in any class as shown in the number of survivals from it, will be found to reflect pretty faithfully the degree to which the special evil represented by it afflicted primitive man, as attested by other branches of prehistoric investigation. As to function, the demons we shall have to consider are those representing 1. Hunger. 2. Excessive heat. 3. Excessive cold. 4. Destructive elements and physical convulsions. 5. Destructive animals. 6. Human enemies. 7. The barrenness of the earth as rock and desert. 8. Obstacles as the river or mountain. 9. Illusion, seductive, invisible, and mysterious agents, causing delusions. 10. Darkness, especially when unusual. Dreams. Nightmare. 11. Disease. 12. Death. These classes are selected in obedience to necessary limitations, as representing the 12 chief labors of man which have given shape to the majority of his haunting demons, as distinguished from his devils. Of course, all classifications of this character must be understood as made for convenience, and the divisions are not to be too sharply taken. What Plotinus said of the gods, that each contained all the rest, is equally true of both demons and devils. The demons of hunger are closely related to the demons of fire. Agni devoured his parents. 2 sticks consumed by the flame they produce, and from them we pass easily to elemental demons like the lightning or demons of fever, and similarly we find a relationship between other destructive forces. Nevertheless, the distinctions drawn are not fanciful, but exist in clear and unmistakable beliefs as to the special dispositions and employments of demons. And as we are not engaged in dealing with natural phenomena, but with superstitions concerning them, the only necessity of this classification is that it shall not be arbitrary, but shall really simplify the immense mass of facts which the student of demonology has to encounter. But there are several points which require especial attention as preliminary to a consideration of these various classes of demons. First, it is to be borne in mind that a single demonic form will often appear in various functions, and that these must not be confused. The serpent may represent the lightning, or the coil of the whirlwind, or fatal venom. The earthquake may represent a swallowing hunger demon, or the rage of a chained giant. The separate functions must not be lost sight of, because sometimes traceable to a single form, nor their practical character suffer disguise through their fair euphemistic or mythological names. Secondly, the same form appears repeatedly in a diabolic as well as a demonic function, and here a clear distinction must be maintained in the reader's mind. The distinction already taken between a demon and a devil is not arbitrary. The word demon is related to deity. The word devil, though sometimes connected with the Sanskrit deva, has really no relation to it, but has a bad sense as calumniator. But even if there were no such etymological identity and difference, it would be necessary to distinguish such widely separate offices as those representing the afflictive forces of nature, where attributed to humanly appreciable motives, on the one hand, and evils ascribed to pure malignancy or a principle of evil on the other. The devil may indeed represent a further evolution in the line on which the demon has appeared. Ahriman the bad in conflict with Ormuz the good may be a spiritualization of the conflict between light and darkness, sun and cloud as represented in the Vedic Indra and Vritra. But the two phases represent different classes of ideas, indeed different worlds, and the apprehension of both requires that they shall be carefully distinguished, even when associated with the same forms and names. Thirdly, there is an important class of demons, which the reader may expect to find fully treated of in the part of my work more particularly devoted to demonology, which must be deferred or further traced in that portion relating to the devil. They are forms which, in their original conception, were largely beneficent, and have become of evil repute, mainly through the anathema of theology. The checkerboard on which Osiris sat had its development in hosts of primitive shapes of light opposing shapes of darkness. The evil of some of these is ideal. Others are morally amphibious. Teraphim, Lares, Genii were ancestors of the guardian angels and patron saints of the present day. They were oftenest in the shapes of dogs and cats and aged human ancestors, supposed to keep watch and ward about the house, like the friendly domovoi respected in Russia. The evil disposition and harmfulness ascribed to them are partly natural, but partly also theological, and due to the difficulty of superseding them with patron saints and angels. The degradation of beneficent beings already described in relation to large demonic and diabolic forms must be understood as constantly acting in the smallest details of household superstition, with what strange reaction and momentous result will appear when we come to consider the phenomena of witchcraft. Finally, it must be remarked that the nature of our inquiry renders the consideration of the origin of myths, whether solar or other, of secondary importance. Such origin it will be necessary to point out and discuss incidentally, but our main point will always be the forms in which the myths have become incarnate, and their modifications in various places and times, these being the result of those actual experiences with which demonology is chiefly concerned. A myth, as many able writers have pointed out, is, in its origin, an explanation by the uncivilized mind of some natural phenomenon, not an allegory, not an esoteric conceit. For this reason it possesses fluidity and takes on manifold shapes. The apparent sleep of the sun in winter may be represented in a vast range of myths, from the 7 sleepers to the man in the moon of our nursery rhyme, but the variations all have relation to facts and circumstances. Comparative mythology is mainly concerned with the one thread running through them and binding them all to the original myth. The task of demonology is rather to discover the agencies which have given their several shapes. If it be shown that Orthros and Cerberus were primarily the morning and evening twilight or howling winds, either interpretation is here secondary to their personification as dogs. Demonology would ask, why dogs? Why not bulls? Its answer in each case detaches from the anterior myth its mode, and shows this as the determining force of further myths. So ends Part 1. Thank you for supporting my channel. See the comments for thought-provoking discussions and subscribe for more free audiobooks.